Hey, this is Melissa. I'm here today to do a sew along with you. We are going to make a knit romper using the brand new Charlie pattern. We're so excited about this pattern, and this is a modification you can make if you want to make it completely out of knit. We are going to use the khaki pattern to mash up to make a few pieces of this particular garment knit because it's just going to work better to use this bodice rather than to use the Charlie bodice. So what you're going to get, what we're going to have in the end is a garment that looks a lot like this one. I'm going to do the short pants and short sleeves. If you want to make yours with long sleeves or long pants, that's fine. You just need to cut out the appropriate pattern pieces for that. But what we're going to need is the khaki. It's going to be the bottom half of the garment. So you'll need the front and the back pants. You'll need the leg bands, and you'll need the gripper strips. You're going to need 2 gripper strips. This is going to be completely unlined. We are not going to put the elastic in the leg bands. I know that's an option on this pattern. We are not going to do that. It is going to be a pull on over the head, no buttons in the back, no placket, going to be really easy care, easy to wear, no ironing kind of outfit. So that's really great for a lot of people that you might be sewing for. As far as the sleeves, if you want to make a puff sleeve for the girl, we're going to use the Charlie short sleeve, and so you'll need that pattern piece along with the sleeve band piece. If you're going to make this for boys, we are going to actually use the khaki sleeve. It's going to end up looking a lot like this sleeve, but it's going to actually be the khaki sleeve. We have to use that sleeve because it is drafted to go with the khaki bodice, and the Charlie straight sleeve won't fit in the khaki bodice. So as far as the khaki pieces that you're going to need, we are going to use the view A, and that's this view right here that normally has a sleeve. If you've ever made this view before, that's great, but it has a different neckline and it has different armholes. So you need to be sure that you're using this one down here. That's what's going to work with the boy sleeve in particular. So it's view A. You'll need the front and the back of the view A bodice. Then you'll need the view A neckband, and then the sleeve we're going to shorten. You can see this is about a 3/4 length sleeve, but we're going to shorten it to make a short sleeve for boys. So those are the pieces you're going to need to come back with. I would ask with the khaki pattern pieces that you go ahead and trace a copy of all of those because we're going to be modifying them just a tad bit. The Charlie pieces, you can just cut the pattern pieces out of your tissue or print them, whatever you need to do, but bring all of those back as you come back, and we will talk about the modifications that we're going to make so that we can make this work. I will also say that with this sew along, I'm going to be doing the sewing mainly off of the camera. I'll be here and talk you through things, and we'll do pinning and talking right here, and then I'll probably go to the camera or go to the machine and do most of that off the camera, and that's when you can be doing your sewing also. So you'll be stopping and pausing a lot along the way as we do this. There are a couple times I'll take you to the machine and show you a couple things up close, but for the most part, you're going to do that on your own. Then we'll come back and talk about the next step. So pausing is going to be what you're doing through a lot of this. So come back with your pattern pieces and we'll do some modifying with them and then go to the next thing. Okay, so we're here with all of the pattern pieces. I'm going to go kind of quickly through these and tell you what you need to do as quickly as I can. We're going to start with Charlie. So this is the Charlie pants front. No modifications to that at all. After you've cut it out, be sure that you put your pattern marking, which is just this little X that's right down here. Next piece is your pants back. And you can see that the pants back here is drafted so that there's a little extension for your placket. And we're not going to have a placket on this, so we're not going to go through the trouble of making it or the time or the effort. Hallelujah. So what we need to do with this pattern piece, you just need to fold it over. So you're going to fold it to where your fold line is in line right through here with your cutting line, and you're going to cut your pattern piece out just like this. All you got to do is fold that over, and you can still use it, for another Charlie in the future if you need to, if it's just folded over. Also be sure that you put your pattern marking on this piece. Next thing to talk about is your pants leg band. Of course, if you, we're going to do the short leg bands for this. You may, if you have a different view that you're doing, yours may look a little bit different than this, but we're doing the short band. What I need you to do is cut 2 of these and also 2 full pieces of interfacing. And when I say interfacing, I mean baby interfacing. Really lightweight, soft interfacing is what we need for this. So 2 pieces of fabric, 2 pieces of baby interfacing. Also, the little gripper strip, and since we're making this unlined, we need 2 gripper strips, so you'll need 2 of these, and these also need to be fully interfaced, so 2 pieces of interfacing for this. Let's talk about the girl sleeve, the puff sleeve. So this is our pattern piece. There's a little modifying to do to this, not a whole lot, but you know the spot between the X's here at the top is where our sleeve cap is and where the gathers are. Since we're putting this sleeve into a bodice that's a little bit different size as far as, you know, the difference between a knit bodice and a woven bodice, we need to spread these gathers out just a little bit. So you're going to take your X, I'm just talking about the ones on the top, and you're going to move them out towards the edge of the sleeve 3/4 of an inch. So this X just needs to move here, and this X needs to move here. All of your other pattern markings, everything else is exactly the same. Be sure you mark your back and your front, and then these X's down here on the bottom that go into your sleeve band, they need to stay in the same place. So cut 2 of those out. Next thing is our little sleeve band here. First thing to say about this is that, you know, it's drafted for woven, this pattern is, and so your grain line has it where you're cutting this on the bias, but we don't need to cut this on the bias since we're cutting it out of fabric that is stretchy. So your grain line on this, when you lay it out to cut it out, it can go this direction or it can go this direction. Either way will work for that. The other thing with this piece is with some knit fabrics, it might be a tiny bit narrow in this direction to make an easy coverage of the gathered bottom of the sleeve. So what we're going to do with that is we are going to increase this length right here. The sleeve band measures 1 1/8 inches, and we are going to make it measure 1 1/4 inch. So your new sleeve band piece is going to be very, very similar. It's just 1/8 of an inch wider, if you can see that, hopefully so. Now this, you know, this long measurement this way is exactly the same. It can be according to the pattern, but just make this a tad bit wider, and that'll make some steps a little bit later a little bit easier. Now to go to the khaki, you're going to need to refer to the blog post that goes along with this sew along, because there are a couple of charts on here that are going to let you know how much length you need to take off of your bodice pieces. It's going to be the same for both the front and the back, but just go to the chart and it'll tell you by size how much length you need to take off. So you'll just have your pattern piece, your trace pattern piece, you know, and you'll put a couple of marks down on the bottom of it for how much you need to take off and draw a line and cut it off, and that'll be your new pattern piece. Also be sure, especially this front bodice has a dot right up here. That's a really important marking to have on there because it's how we get our neck band just exactly right. So be sure you have that pattern marking on there as well. Also, I'll point out that I just wrote on my new pattern piece, I wrote shortened for Charlie. So now that when I'm done with this, I can stick this new bodice, all these new pieces in with my Charlie, and next time I want to make a knit Charlie, I'll have everything together and I won't have to remake this pattern piece. I believe this size 12 was shortened 1/2 inch, so it's not a lot of change, but it is something we need to do to make the length of our final garment be just right. Now to the boys sleeve, you're also going to need to refer to the blog post for that because it's going to be the same thing. We're going to need to shorten it. Remember, this khaki sleeve is a 3/4 sleeve, so we're going to take a good bit of length off of it to make it a short sleeve. Everything else on it will be exactly the same. Now the next thing I'm going to do is talk about just several minutes about talking about sewing with knits. If you are experienced and well-seasoned sewing with knits, you don't have to even watch that part if you don't want to, but just going to give you some tips and pointers that I've learned over the last few years as I've been sewing more and more with knits. Nothing earth-shattering or new, but if you've never sewn with them before, it might be a few tips that you hadn't heard before, things that are good to know. So that's going to be the next thing we do, and then after that we will get to stitching. So I will see you in a few. Let's talk about sewing with knits. First thing I want to say that is if you're using a Children's Corner pattern for knits, all of those patterns have a section at the beginning of the pattern that give you notes on sewing with knits. This is great information. I would always refer to it. go on and read over it, and it's going to tell you pretty much everything I'm about to tell you, but now I may say a few extra things, but this is great. So be sure that you refer to this. Don't just gloss over it. It has a lot of good information there. You know, there are a lot of different types of knits on the market. Mostly what I use is a jersey spandex knit. Sea Island knit doesn't have spandex, but it's a similar weight and type. I know that there are a lot of other things. You know, there's Ponte knits, there's DBP, SBP, all kinds of bamboo type things, rayon knits. Usually what we're sewing with Children's Corner garments is the spandex knit. Usually it has 4-way stretch. There may be a few that have 2-way stretch, but just kind of letting you know what realm of knits I'm talking about as we're going forward. But I've got a couple of different examples of things here that you might find at Children's Corner that we might use to sew with. This first one here is Sea Island knit. It's a lot of people's favorite knits, has a lot of great qualities. It feels wonderful. I think everybody would want to wear this all the time if they could. It is pricey, especially the prints. Actually, the solids are a comparable price to some other knits that Children's Corner carries or that you would find other places, but the prints are definitely pricey. But there are a lot of good things about sewing with this. It might be a special garment that you would use, but one good thing is that when you wash this fabric, it doesn't curl. Now, every time every time I bring home knit fabric, I throw it in the washing machine. You always have to wash it because it always shrinks. So first, get that out of the way first. You have to wash it. You need to wash it and dry it in whichever way you think the garment is going to be washed and dried. So if you think they're going to throw it in a hot dryer, I would throw it in a hot dryer because you want to get as much shrinking out as it's going to do on the front end before you cut everything out. So one thing about Sea Island knit is that after you wash it, you don't get any curled edges. You can see that. So that is another really nice quality about it that you might not know about. So that's all I'm going to say about that particular fabric. Most fabrics, you are going to get a little bit of curling. Hopefully you can see this. This is a wash piece of fabric, knit fabric, very cute. But what you'll find after you've washed the fabric, and this is something that frustrates a lot of people the most about sewing with knits, is this curling that you get. Usually it's going to curl up towards the face or the pattern side, and when you get over to the selvage side, it's going to curl away. And you can spend a lot of time and effort with your iron and starch trying to roll this down and get it nice and straight so that you can use every little bit of fabric. But what I have found is that I don't do that at all. I just take my pattern piece and I put it far away enough from that curled edge that I don't have to deal with this at all. And every time I've made a pattern with Children's Corner or made a garment with Children's Corner patterns, I've had plenty of fabric where cutting away the curled edge on a wash piece of fabric has not given me any trouble. So cut away and that will be very helpful. What you will find though is that after you've cut out your pattern, sometimes you're still going to get some more curling. It's not ever going to be as curled up as much as this one, but I'll just show you a little example here. Here's a little bodice that I've cut out for a project, and you can see what we've got here is this little curled edge right now. And this is what really probably frustrates a lot of people. But what I will say is this is the right side. It's curling towards the right side. So many times, not every time, you can take your other piece of fabric and you're going to put right sides together and you can line it up where they don't curl at all. If I can get it here to show you, but you can line it up where it's not going to curl because the curls are going into each other. And so once you get some pins in here, you're not going to have trouble with that curl. So that's just one thing to say about that. What I do after I have cut out a garment to also help with the curling is I try not to touch it. I try not to manipulate it. I just cut it out, lay it down, leave it alone until I'm ready to work with it. The more you move it around, and even if you try to iron it, sometimes I think the ironing even makes it curl up a little bit more. So just try to leave it alone, touch it as little as possible. I mentioned ironing. Every time you're sewing, you're using an iron, or you should be. It really makes your garments look so much better. But when you're sewing knits, I have an iron that's not hot here. When you're sewing with knits, you want to be sure that as you're pressing on your garment, you're pressing down. You're actually pressing, you're not doing this motion, because as you do that, that is distorting the fabric, it's stretching it out. And that's just not good. You want your fabric to stay exactly how you've cut it so that everything comes together just right. So that's another thing. Another thing that can distort your fabric is as you have everything laying out on your table, and you may have a long length of knit fabric, and that knit fabric is bulkier and heavier. So if I have this bulky, heavy end of fabric over the side of my table, what it's doing is it's pulling the fabric on top that I'm trying to cut. So really, you don't need to have that end of your fabric hanging off the end of your cutting table. You need to find a place for it to be on the table so that what you're working on is not being stretched at all. See what else I have to say. There's so much to say. I think we're done with that though. So next thing, as you're going to sew with things, you are going to need to use a jersey or a stretch needle. These are available a lot of places. They're pretty common. It's a needle that is specially made with a ball point so that it is not going to pierce the fabric or pierce the fibers of the fabric. It's going to work its way in between the fibers so it doesn't put a hole in your fabric. So jersey or stretch needles are important. For this particular project, we are going to use a twin needle. It's pretty common in sewing for knits, and this is a stretch twin needle. A lot of people struggle with tunneling when they use twin needles, and what that means is, I should say the twin needle, it stitches on the top with a straight stitch, and you use 2 threads to do that. Then on the bottom, there's just 1 thread, and it's a zigzag between it. So what makes it nice with knits, besides the fact that it's a really pretty top stitch, it's stretchy. So because it's stretchy, it's just really nice for fabric that tends to stretch. So what else to say about this is my preference is one that is 2.5 in size. What that means is 2.5 millimeters between the 2 needles. If you're sewing with a twin needle doing heirloom, it is ideal for there to be a little bump between, or the tuck in between the 2 needles. But when you're sewing with knit, you want that to be nice and flat. And when it's not flat, when it tunnels up, that's called tunneling. So what I've found is that if I use this needle where the needles are very close together, I get less tunneling. Now, a lot of people do change their tension out on their machines to help with tunneling. What I've found is I don't have to deal with any tension. I don't have to make any tension changes on my machine if I use this type needle. So give it a try, order some if you don't happen to have this size, and see what you think. When you're actually sewing, back to your straight stitching, when you're actually sewing, you are going to sew with a zigzag or a stretch stitch. A lot of machines have a stretch stitch programmed in, and you can use that. If I use a zigzag, which is what I tend to normally do most of the time, it is a width of 0.5 and a length of 2.5 to 3. So that's really just barely a zigzag, but it's enough that it gives your seam just a tiny bit of stretch so that as the garment is being put on or worn, those seams don't pop. Because if you sew with especially a short straight stitch and it gets stretched over the head, something like that, that seam can pop. And that's not ideal, of course. Another thing to talk about as you're sewing with knits, and this is an option some people might have and others might not, but there is an adjustment that some machines have, an adjustment of your presser foot pressure. And that on my machine, I have a computerized machine, so that's something I just go and program in. I know other machines may have a little dial on the top that you would just move to adjust that, but you would have to look in your owner's manual and see if that's an option. If it's not an option, it's no big deal. I'm just telling this for people who have it. And what it does to adjust that is, your presser foot presses down on the base of the sewing machine with your fabric in between. If it's pressing super hard, that fabric that's underneath, if it's knit, it tends to kind of stretch out and distort as it goes through. And so if you lift that where it's not pressing quite as hard, it will run through a little bit more smoothly. My machine is set with a default of 50 for my presser foot pressure, and I usually set it down to 24, 25, and that seems to help things move a little bit more smoothly. So not something you have to do, but if you have it as an option, you might give it a try. You know, after you have cut out whatever it is, whichever garment you are making with knit, it is a great idea to take those scraps to the machine before you even get started and just give it a try. Try some stitching, try, zigzag, twin needle, whatever you feel like you need to try, just to see how your machine handles that particular fabric. I know even within the realm of the fabrics that we get at Children's Corner, there are different feels and different weights, and everything acts a little bit differently. This Sea Island acts differently than the other knit. It tends to want to stretch out a little bit more than the others. So you just have to kind of play with it before each project and figure out what you need to do as you're making the project. But it's nice before you start on the actual garment to try that. Let's see, one last thing to say is there's a product out there that I really like, and this is totally optional. It's called Knit Stay Tape. This makes some aspects of sewing with knits a little bit easier. It's a little bit like an interfacing for knits. Comes in a roll, and once you get it out, looks like this. This particular one is a 1/2 inch width, but what it does is you iron it to the edges of your garment, not every edge, but certain edges, and it gives it a little bit more strength and body, but it still stretches. You know, if you put an interfacing strip onto fabric, it might not always stretch as much as you want it to, but this stuff will stretch and recover. So it's really good. I like it if I'm gonna put like a gathered bottom onto a bodice. I might put the stay tape across the bottom of this is a bodice, but across the bottom here, and that'll give this area a little bit more strength so it doesn't get stretched out, but it'll still maintain the stretchiness of the garment. Another thing that you can do is put it like at the top of the shoulders. I can show you this one. See, it doesn't really have too much curling like the other one did. I'll show you the other one. This was the one without the stay tape. No differences, but you can just see it's curling and this one's not. So it does help with that. Now, I don't think you need to put stay tape on every edge of every knit garment, but it does really help in some situations. So might be something you want to check out, give a try at some point. So that is all to say about sewing with knits. We are going to move on to the next step in this sew along. And so come back and we will get to stitching. One more thing to say that I have to add, because I talked so much I forgot something, but you don't have to have a serger to make this pattern. To do any Children's Corner knit pattern, you do not have to have a serger. It is ideal to finish your stitches with a serger. Certainly not totally necessary. You can trim and zigzag with your regular machine. All we're doing with the serger is just finishing the inside edges of the garment. So, you know, really and truly, you don't have to finish the inside edges of a knit garment because knit fabric doesn't fray at all. But if you want it to look a little bit better, you can trim it where your edges are even and then do a zigzag, or if you have a serger, you can use that. So either way is fine. I'll say all through this video, you know, finish your edges, and that means do whichever way you prefer to do, whether it's zigzag or serger. Either one is just fine. So let's get started with the stitching. We are going to start with the khaki. So you need your khaki instructions. We're going to start right here with instruction number 1, and you need your 2 bodice pieces in your neckband to do this section of the pattern. And the first thing it says is to make sure that you have your pattern markings on here. Hopefully you've already done that. The main thing that you're going to need are a couple of dots that are on your front bodice piece. But place your front bodice with your back bodice right sides together, and then we're going to stitch these shoulder seams. So all that's going to be is just pin it in place both sides, and then you are going to stitch these in place. I'm going to go ahead. I'm not going to go I'm not going to take you to the sewing machine every time I go to the sewing machine. We're going to pin things and talk about it and then let you go to the sewing machine. If there's something special, I might move my camera over there at some point. But as long as it's just straight seams, we're just going to do that off camera. But I have both of my shoulders stitched here. We're going to do that. All of the seam allowances on this garment, or most of them, are going to be 1/4 inch. So these are going to be 1/4 inch. The one around the neck is actually going to be 3/8 of an inch. And then our seam here at the waist is usually 1/2 of an inch. So once we get through with all this, I think everything will be a 1/4 of an inch seam. So you're going to stitch these 2 shoulder pieces here and here. After you've stitched it, you're going to finish the edges, which you can do either with a serger or you can do with a zigzag. You know, knit fabric doesn't ravel. You don't absolutely have to finish it. It's just a nicer, more professional look if you do. So stitch those. And then also you can stitch your neckband. So you're going to take your 2 short edges and put it together. Put a couple of pins in this here. And you're going to stitch with your 1/4 inch seam allowance across this edge as well. Now this piece you don't have to finish. You're going to press it open with your iron. And one thing that I didn't mention that I probably should have, that as you're pressing with your iron, you want to be sure that you are pressing straight down and that you're not running your iron back and forth like you would a vacuum cleaner. You're going to press straight down so that you're not distorting this fabric in any way as it goes along. So any of the pressing you're doing, that's going to be how we do it, especially with knits. So go on and stitch your shoulders and stitch your neckband end. Finish your shoulders, press this one open, and then we'll come back and go to the next step. Okay, moving to the next step, we have just done the shoulders, and I've also went ahead and stitched the neckband into a circle and pressed that out. I am now going to step 3. If you look at step 3 on the khaki instructions, it tells you to do some stay stitching across the bottom here to keep the fabric from stretching out. You can do that using a 1/4 inch seam, and then that will keep it from stretching as you go forward. What I mentioned before about the stay tape, this is a time where I would use that rather than do the stay stitching. So if you have the stay tape, you can use that. If you don't, you can go ahead and just do the stay stitching like the pattern says. But you're just going to sew straight across both the front and the back with a 1/4 inch seam allowance to keep everything from stretching. Now when I use the stay tape, I just iron it in place. My stay tape is a 1/2 an inch, and so what I usually do is I will place it just a little bit up from the edge because I want the stay tape to be into my seam where I actually stitch. And since it's a 1/2 inch seam allowance, I need to move it up just a little bit. So I might leave about 1/8 of an inch loose down here on the edge where it doesn't have any stay tape. But go ahead and iron that all the way across in the front and the back. So do one of those techniques. Either one is fine. But also in addition to that, let's go ahead and mark the center of your bodice in the front and in the back. Also be sure that you mark the center of your bodice, the neck in the front and the back, so that we can get everything lined up later. Now that we have our neckband here, the next thing we're going to do also in this little sewing break is go ahead and iron it with the wrong sides together, so that it looks like this all the way around. So you're going to iron it flat, trying not to stretch it too much, although this is the one piece on this garment that we are going to encourage you to stretch here in just a minute. But once you have that ironed in place, it's also good to mark your middle on that. So the way you're going to do that is you're going to take your fold, put it at the edge. This is... and then you're going to mark the opposite corner. And I'm going to mark both the top and the bottom here. And then I'm going to take those 2 little marks and I'm going to line them up here with my seam. And I'm going to get these 1/4 marks here. So I've got my middles lined up now, and I can come over here and I can mark the 1/4 line, a 1/4 of the way around, and then I need to go to the other side and do that. There are marks on the pattern on the neck that are going to correspond with these marks. So now that we have them all marked, we're going to go iron that with wrong sides together and iron your stay tape in place or do the stay stitching and come back and we will go to the next step. Ready for the next step. Got this band that's all marked and folded and pressed, and then also the shoulders here are ready to go. Find the place in your neckband where you have the seam, and we're going to pin it in place to the neck of the garment at the center back. Make sure that you're pinning it to the center back and to the center front because you don't want a seam on your neckband right there in the center on the front. With this particular fabric, I'm having to take care to make sure that I'm getting my sailboats up as I do this. So if you're using a directional fabric, pay attention to that. But so I've got my dot here and I've got my seam here. I'm going to pin that in place. So it's right up here. So now I'm going to go down to the center in the middle of the bottom down here, and I've got a mark here next to the center of that I can pin in place. Get that pin in there. Okay, and then we're going to come over here. Now remember, we have a couple of little dots on the side of the neck, and that's going to line up with your quarter mark on your neckband. So we will do that, get those lined up. Now the neckband is smaller than the opening for the neck, and as we sew it here in just a few minutes, we're going to stretch that neckband to fit the size of the neck of the garment. That's what's going to create a nice curve along there. So this is the only time that I know of that you'll be encouraged, or that I will encourage you to stretch the to stretch out the knit fabric. But so you can see that, maybe you can see, you can see that my neckband is straighter here, and I've got a little bit of excess fabric on the neck that I'm going to have to pull tighter so that they fit like that. So I'm going to go ahead and put 4 more pins in between the ones that I have. I'll have 8 total, and I'm just going to have to kind of stretch out that neckband while not stretching the bodice neck to get these pins in place. And then we're going to take it to the machine and stitch it. So let me get all 8 of these in. Now this next little seam that we sew, when we sew the neckband to the garment, is a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Be sure that that's what you're doing as you sew it. Also remember that we are sewing all of these straight stitches with a zigzag on your machine, zigzag or a stretch stitch. So I've got everything pinned in place, and what I'm going to do is take it and put it in my machine, under my machine. I will probably start over here at one of these sides, and I'm going to stitch all the way around, and I'm going to have to pull the bottom fabric so that it stretches, or pull it so that the top fabric stretches to match the bottom fabric as I'm stitching. I'm going to give that a try here, and we will come back in just a few. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch this with my camera right up here at the sewing machine. This is I'm going to point out that this is a 3/8 inch seam allowance that I'm using here. I have an extra wide presser foot on here that has a wider seam allowance to the edge. So this is 3/8 that I'm doing, but I'm just going to begin stitching with my little zigzag. And as I do this, I am stretching my fabric between you know, where the needle is and where the next pin is. Now I'm going to pull that pin just as soon as it gets right up there. And I'm kind of holding it taut between my fingers here as I go. Now I'm going to pull this one out. We're going to go to the next one. And you can go nice and slow with this. There's no rush. I'm just holding it taut there while keeping it nice and straight. And you can let that pin go pretty close to your presser foot. It's actually a little bit under my presser foot, but I'm pulling it out now. You don't want to sew over the pins. But now I'm pulling it taut again as I keep going around. I'm going to pull that one, and we are just going to keep going all the way around this neck. It's really not a huge amount of stretching that we're doing, just a little bit of gentle stretching to get it in place. And you can kind of move it back and forth if you need to. All right, so I'll just keep going along here. About to the back center. All right, so you can see that I have stitched the neckband all the way around the neck, finished it up all the way around. Now what we have, if we look at the inside here, is a pretty wide seam. And what the instructions say is that you need to trim this down to 1/4 inch. So I'm going to do that next. And then you need to finish this seam, whether you do it with a zigzag or a serge or either one, but go all the way around and finish this seam just like this. Now I will say, if it looks a little bit nicer if you're using a serger and you stop and start over here on the side, because you realize as you're looking at the garment when it's not being worn, if you've got messy serger beginning and ending stitches, it just doesn't look as good right there. So start over here at the side seam where it's not going to be as evident where you've started and stopped, and it will look a little bit better for you. So that's what I'm going to do next. Trim this and then serge it, and then we'll come back and we'll do the twin stitch with the top stitching. Okay, I'm back with you again real quick. We have the inside of this seam finished, and I have gone to the ironing board and I have pressed it where everything will lay nice and flat. And the next step we're going to use is to use the twin needle. Now the twin needle stitching is going to go on the bodice fabric right outside of the neckband, right in this space here. So when I'm stitching the stitches, it's going to go through the top layer of the bodice, and it's going to stitch down my seam allowance here on the back. So I like to use a twin needle that has a 2.5 width. You can use any size, but especially for a smaller garment like this, I like to use this particular width. And we're going to sew just really very close to this edge right here, like probably 1/8 of an inch or maybe even 1/16 of an inch from the edge with that left-sided needle. Or actually it'll be going this way. So it will be the right needle that will be away from this edge right here. I'm going to take it over to the machine and set up my camera over there so you can see exactly where we're going to stitch that. The twin needle is going to stitch 2 stitches on the top, and then on the back side it zigzags between them. So you have 1 thread on the bottom, 2 on the top. You'll have to look at your manual for your sewing machine to see the way that that's supposed to be set up for your particular machine. For most of them, it's a really easy threading process. You just thread the machine and bring it down into 2 needles. Also, I am changing my stitch over from the zigzag that I've done on everything else back to a straight stitch. The twin stitch has a little bit of stretch in it, so that's a nice thing because of the zigzag on the back. And I'm doing a top stitch length, which would be a 3. So my machine is set just at a regular straight stitch with a length of 3 for the top stitching. I'm going to take it over here to the machine and show you how this goes. Okay, I have this twin needle set up on the machine. You know, here are the 2 needles right here. They're all threaded, and I've got the neckband up underneath my presser foot. I'm going to try to keep this little side of the presser foot lined up with this seam line right here as I go around. I'm going to go nice and slow, and we'll get started and see how this goes. This is all I'm going to do all the way around the entire neckband. This is going to put my seam really close to the edge. You just have to take it slow. Got all kinds of extra threads here. Just kind of take it slow as you go around. No need to be in a hurry with this part because this is a part that's going to be rather visible on the front of the garment. And I'm really just keeping my eye right here on this point the whole way. Now sometimes as you get to a place where there's a seam allowance, you may need to help it through. If you have an awl or a pin, you can do that, but sometimes it's gonna act up. See how I'm kind of pushing with this as it gets right up underneath the presser foot. And now I can straighten it out, and I think it's gonna behave itself going forward. There we go. I'm just going to go all the way around. Now I'm around to the front. Just going to take this all the way around to the beginning point where we started. Really, the slower you go, probably the better result you're going to have. Once again, I'm right back up here at the seam. I'm going to go ahead and these two top threads that I have where I started, I'm going to go in and clip them, get them out of the way for now, because we're going to try our best to line up these two needles with the beginning of the stitching over here, and then do the back stitch at that point. Now I'm at the point again where I'm at a seam. So helping it through a little bit with this awl might be a nice thing. And now I can see where my needles are coming and see my two lines of stitches. And I'm going to try to line them up as close as I can here, and then do a little bit of a back stitch. And that should finish it for me. And now let's take this off and we can take a look and see how it looks. It's a pretty nice little stitch right there across the front. Very close, and I think that'll be good. We'll take it to the iron and just press it flat a little bit. There is a little bit of stretching that's happened in here, which is just kind of normal, but usually if you steam it a little bit and kind of let it draw up, that will fix itself. So next we will see you back at the other place to go to the next step. Let's get started with the sleeves. We are going to start with the boy's sleeve for this garment, just continuing with the khaki instructions. After we finish the boy, I'm going to do the girl with you on another little garment, but we are on step 7 if you're following along in the instructions. So I've got my two sleeves here, the khaki sleeve that has been shortened, and we've got our pattern marking. So the first thing you're supposed to do is put some ease stitching in between the X's. This is just a line of lengthened machine stitching a little bit inside of the 1/4 inch seam allowance. You need to do it about a stitch length of around 4 all the way around. This is what we're going to be able to use, just one single thread we're going to be able to use to pull the, if there happens to be any excess in the cap of the sleeve, just to make it fit our bodice. And so we're going to do that first. The other thing I'm going to have you do at this point, which is not in the instructions, is to finish this lower edge of the sleeve. And all that means, and actually I guess you don't even have to totally finish it, but this edge, this bottom edge of the sleeve is going to be just folded up like this and then top stitched with a twin needle from the other side. So if you don't want to do anything to this inside edge, you don't have to. It is a little bit nicer look if you can do some serging on the edge before you flip it up and top stitch it. And it also gives your top stitching just a little bit more body when it's got those serged or zigzag stitches in there. Where it becomes a problem is that sometimes whenever you are serging or zigzagging a single layer of knit fabric, which has stretch, you really have trouble with that fabric stretching out a lot, even when you're decreasing the presser foot pressure. I'm going to show you a couple little examples here. This is just a little piece of this same fabric that I just did a zigzag on the edge. You can see how raggedy it looks along there. Not nice. I mean, I could press it, but it is still a little bit just misshapen, which is not great. But this is what I get with just a zigzag with the exact same settings if I have put the knit stay tape on the back. Now this is not just like interfacing. I know I've talked about this stuff. It is an interfacing, but it's stretchy. So it's not, it's more stretchy than baby interfacing would be, but it just provides enough stability where those stitches are going to go in a little bit straighter and nicer looking. So if you don't have a serger and you're trying to do this and get some nice looking finishes on the inside, I really highly recommend this stuff. But you just, just iron it to the inside. It is still going to maintain some stretch, if you can see that, but it also recovers pretty well with that on there. So anyway, this is another great use for this stuff if you decide that you want to give it a try. But that way now, whenever we would flip that hem in and top stitch from the other side, we have a nice little bit heavier base to make that top stitching look a little bit nicer. So if you have that, go on and apply it directly to the very edge of the inside of each of the bottom sleeves. If you don't have it, that's okay. Just do your best with using a zigzag or serging, or you don't have to do any type of stitching like that at all if you just want to flip it over and top stitch it that way. But I'm giving you options. So that will be the next step for us, and then we will move into putting them into the sleeves, into the garment. So we're ready to put this sleeve into the garment. And we've got these markings on our sleeve piece and we're going to use them now. There's a dot and then 2 X's. I've also got the back of my sleeve towards the back of the garment. Be sure you've got that just right. Take the dot that is on your sleeve and line it up with the seam line of your garment, your khaki top, and place a pin. And then we are going to go down to the corners here and get that edge pinned. And then up to the point where the X is, just line that up nicely with your edges together, right sides together, and put a pin there. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Now I have my ease stitching here in place that is, between these X's, and we are going to use it to pull up the excess fabric that is on the sleeve that needs to fit into here. And so it's kind of like a gathering stitch. It's just one stitch though. You're not having to pull very much or pull very hard. What we're going to do is just gently pull it here. And I'm going to put some tiny little gathers here into the sleeve. I've done it a little bit here and I'm just going to spread it out. You don't want the sleeve to look gathered when it's stitched. It is going to be kind of gathered looking on the seam allowance, but realize that when we are stitching, we're actually stitching along very close to this line of the ease stitching. So as long as that area is straight up against the back, we are good. So just let me see how it's matched up here. I think it's pretty good here. You can always just move those little gathers around if you need to. Once you have it fitting the space pretty well, take your excess thread over here and just kind of wrap it around this pin to secure it. And then we'll do the same thing to the other side, but I'm going to go ahead and only pin this side for now in the interest of time in videos that are very long. I'm going to do that. Okay, so we're going to pin in between. And then the next thing I'm going to do after we've pinned the sleeve completely in place is take it to the machine and stitch with the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Remember that our ease stitching is a little bit inside. It was a scant 1/4 inch, so my stitching should be right along it or even a little bit more, towards this part of the sleeve as I go around. And the goal is that there wouldn't actually be any gathers present or little pleats within the body of this once it's stitched. And so once it's done, I've already done this sleeve, it should look like this on the inside. And then on the outside, it actually looks like a little shirt at this point. So where there shouldn't be, it should be pretty smooth looking along this edge. Of course, you can do a little bit of light pressing to get that even more straight usually. But also after you have stitched this line of stitching and you've looked to make sure that you like how everything looks, then you can come and do some machine finishing with your serger or zigzag all the way along this seam. So go ahead and take care of doing all of that on both sleeves, and when you come back we will work on the side seams and go from there. So the sleeve is stitched into the armhole. A couple things I didn't mention is that you can go ahead and remove your ease stitching and go ahead and press your seam allowance towards the sleeve. Once you've done that, we are ready to sew the side seam of the garment and the side and the underarm seam. So you're just going to line those up. It should match up just right, just like this. Just match up your seams under the arm here to start with and pin that in place. And then we can do some pins on each end and a few in between. And that's all we're going to do in this step is stitch this seam and then stitch this seam here and then finish it, press the seam allowance towards the back of the garment and do this to both sides. Once we've done this, we'll just need to hem and we'll be finished with the top of the garment. Okay, we have the side seams done and we are ready to hem these sleeves. So I've got everything turned inside out, as you can see. What we're going to do is go to this first sleeve and it's going to be hemmed 1/2 inch. So fold it up and then take your iron, measure your 1/2 inch, take your iron and press it all the way around so that you have a nice pressed edge with 1/2 inch to the inside. After you've done that, you can put some pins in it all the way around. Now, I'm going to show you this other side because I've already pinned it in place. So I have everything pinned and ready to put on the machine. What we're going to do next is do another twin stitch on the machine. I'm going to move my camera over there to show you how we do it and how we're setting it up. Remember that it's going to be a straight stitch with a length of 3. Go on and get your machine ready and we will get started in just a minute. So I have my fabric here at the machine. Everything is set up to do the twin needle stitching. I have my my garment inside out because we are going to sew from the inside of the sleeve, which is going to make it be on the right side of the fabric. But since it's a small sleeve, we have to set it up this way. But the reason I want to show it to you this direction to start with is that we need to see exactly where on the sewing machine we want to place our fabric. And ideally, this our twin needle is going to hit our seam allowance right here on the edge with the left needle and then just a little bit over with the right needle. You get a nicer looking stitch if they're both going through a double layer of fabric. If one of them's going over to a single layer of fabric over here and the other double, you get some tunneling. It's just not quite as pretty, but it does still hold the fabric, but it just doesn't look as good. So I have everything lined up here about how I would like it, and I'm going to come look over here on this side and see which line on my machine I'm going to line the edge up with going forward, because I'm about to move this where I won't be able to see exactly what it is. So some people might even put a piece of tape along here just to guide them so they can see exactly where they want it to be. I'm just going to try to remember. But so now we're going to come over here and open up the bottom of the sleeve and get it put under the presser foot. Now it is a little bit of a juggling act to deal with these pins because you need to keep them in, and it's a small space we're working with. I'm trying not to stretch things too much. But anyway, so I have it lined up pretty well with the line that I'm going to be working, and now I'm just going to begin stitching. I know this is a little hard to see with white thread on white fabric, but that's what we've got. So my twin needle is set up with a length of 3 and a straight stitch. And I'm just going to go all the way around, keeping it lined up with the line that I have in my head that I looked at earlier. I'm not going to stitch over pins, but I do kind of use the pin as it's moving toward the presser foot to get the fabric in there straight. You see what I mean about juggling with these other pins, but we are getting there. It's a whole lot easier to do this on a sleeve that's bigger. This little 12-month is a pretty small sleeve to be stitching on the inside with, but we're going to go all the way around with the twin needling, top stitching. And remember, I said earlier that once you get to where there's a seam allowance you're going over, sometimes you need something to kind of help move the fabric through smoothly. So that's what I'm going to do with this all. Hopefully that'll get it there pretty nicely. And I'm also looking at my 2 threads here down here and trying to line up my 2 needles so that it will all end and begin at the same spot. Okay, I believe we're done with that. Okay, now that we're finished with the boy sleeve, we're ready to move on to the girl sleeve. Go ahead and get your cut fabric pieces out for your sleeve and your sleeve band. I am working in this sew along on the girls version on a garment that has already mostly been constructed. It just has everything done except for the sleeves. So as I demonstrate, you're going to see that the lower half of that garment is already complete, but we haven't really done that in the sew along yet. So just hold on and we will get to the lower half after we demonstrate this sleeve. And so we are ready to get started. The next thing you need to do is get your fabric and sew your gathering stitches between the X's at the top of the sleeve, and then there's some more gathering stitches that are going to go at the lower half of the sleeve. Some people like to do 2 rows of gathering stitches. Some people like to do 3 rows. Either is just fine. Your first gathering stitch needs to be 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, and then you'll have another one 3/8 of an inch away from the edge. So go on and do the gathering stitches to both of your sleeve pieces, and then also your sleeve band. It needs to be pressed 1/4 of an inch towards the wrong side of the fabric along one long edge. So once you've completed all that, come back and we will move on. Okay, here we are ready to start on the girls' sleeve. You have been patiently waiting while we did the boys' sleeve, but now it's time for the girls. I've got my short puff sleeve piece here, and I've also got the band piece for one of the sides. First thing you need to do is fold over your piece in half and mark the center point at the bottom down here. And then do the same thing for your band. Mark the center of it with just a little marking pin. Now we are going to be working with the raw edge that is not pressed, and we are going to put it to the right side of the dress. So that's going to be this one right here, or the sleeve rather. And so I'm going to line up the end and put a pin here at the end. Then I'm going to move straight over to the point where the gathering stitches begin and put another pin here. We're going to do the same on the other side. Put one on the end, and then one right where they start. If you want to put some pins in between these spots in this space, that's totally great too. Okay, and now the next place to pin is right in the middle. You're going to put your 2 little marks together and get that pinned in place. Now the next thing we need to do is pull the gathering threads that we have here on the top, and we're going to pull the fabric where this sleeve fits the sleeve band. Now this is a part where it would be really easy to stretch out the sleeve band a lot, so try your best not to be stretching along the back, but just to be pulling on the front. So I've got these, and I'm just going to start to pull, and that will gather up the sleeve. Pull it up to about where it looks like it's about the same distance there, and then we're going to do a figure 8 wrap around the pin, and that's going to secure that end for now. I'm going to go on over to the other side and do the same thing, pulling my gathering threads. It is ideal if the ones that you are pulling are the bobbin threads from your machine. It's not the end of the world if they aren't, but they do pull a little bit easier. So I'm pulling where this space matches up again. I'm going to wrap again around this pin that I have at the end of the gathering threads. And now what I need to do is distribute these gathers evenly. And so it really is nice when you have those 3 gathering threads. Sometimes doing it with a pin might even be nice to get everything spaced out the way you like it. But anyway, once you have them spaced out, you can just get a few more pins in it. And we'll do that all the way across. And then once you have everything pinned in place and looking the way you want to with where your gathers are placed, you can take it to the machine and sew it. You're going to sew all the way across this band. This is going to be on the top. Start here and go all the way down using your tiny zigzag like we've been using, and do that on both sleeves, and then you can remove your gathering threads. So now that the sleeve band is on, you can take your sleeve to the iron, and you want to press your seam allowance towards the band so that it has a nice press up along here. After you have pressed it towards the sleeve band, your gathering stitches are out. I should also say, anytime you are done with one of your pattern markings that you have made with one of these little blue markers, it's good to go ahead and wet your fabric and get rid of it, because if you press over it, that spot could come back. So it's always best to remove them if they're going to be on a visible part of your garment. So I did actually spray in here because I had some that were visible from the outside. So after you've got that pressed, you are going to come and you're going to put your side seams together of your sleeve, pin this in place, and stitch across the end, making sure that the seam allowance for the is pointed towards the bottom. So stitch both of those, and then we'll be ready for the next thing. So this seam is stitched in place. We have the circle of our sleeve. I asked you to stitch this, but I didn't say you do need to finish this stitching and press it towards the back of the sleeve. And then the next thing we're going to do is we are going to fold down this edge that we had already pressed the 1/4 inch. So we're going to fold it on that fold line and then fold it one more time to where that folded edge meets our stitch line. And we're going to put pins in this all the way around, just folding it down. And this is the part where it's nice because we have a little bit of extra width in our fabric to get it around all of these gathers. So we are going to do it all the way around the entire circle, and once you have them all pinned all the way around with your raw edges all enclosed, then you're going to just take a needle and thread and whip it all the way around by hand. Once you do that, it's going to look like this when it's finished. It's a really nice finished sleeve with the inside, just everything is enclosed. So once you are done doing this to both of your sleeves, we are going to be ready for our next gathering experience of many that we're going to do on this garment. We're ready now to set the sleeve into the garment. Remember when we did the boy's sleeve, when we started that, everything was open. But for the girl's sleeve, we need to have the side seams stitched before we put the sleeve in. So that's going to be the next step that you're going to do. You are going to stitch your bodice front to the bodice back at the side seams. Once you've done each side, you're going to finish that and press it towards the back. Now we are on step 29 on the Charlie instructions. If you happen to be following along, we're finishing up the girl's sleeve. We're going to set it into the bodice. I'm going to put the sleeve and the bodice together with right sides together, which means the sleeve's going to be kind of inside here. We've got our side seams stitched here. And I'm going to put a pin. I've got my two underarm seams right here together, and I'm going to pin those in place right together. Now the next thing is just to start pinning around this armhole. The first sections that we come to are just going to be completely the 2 flat pieces of fabric together up until we get to the gathering stitches. So just pin those in place every so often. And we will get up here to the gathering stitches and stop our pinning. So here's where they begin for me, right here. So I've got that done. Now I'm going to go to the other side and do the same thing, pinning in that flat space before we get to the gathering. So this is the lower edge of the armhole all the way up to the gathering. So, you know, we used the khaki sleeve with the khaki bodice for the boy because it was a straight sleeve and there's not much, you just have to have, if you're putting a straight sleeve in the bodice, it has to be the sleeve that goes with that bodice. But since this is a puff sleeve for the girl, there is some give and take because we have gathering. So the gathering at the top of this sleeve can take up the space of what would be a different size armhole from a woven to a knit garment. So that is why we can use this girl sleeve but not the boys. So we are gonna pull these gathering threads. Got my 3 threads here. I can get hold of just those 3. And I'm gonna begin to pull. And I'm just gonna pull up this gathering so that this space here matches. And you can see it's gonna be pretty gathered. That's quite a lot to pull up into that space. It's going to fit though and be very pretty. I've already done the other sleeve. I'm gonna show that to you when we get through here with this gathering. But I pulled one side just a little bit and did the figure 8 knot on that side. Now I'm gonna go over here and I'm gonna do the same just till we get all of this gathering up into the top here. And it's getting pretty close. Other pins are getting in the way. Okay, so now I can do another little figure 8 wrap here, and I've got everything where it pretty much is about the same size. And now I can take a pin or my fingers, whatever, and just kind of even out these gathers where they're pretty close to the same thing all the way across. And once we've done that, we can pin them in place. And actually I'm seeing that it looks like I don't have it pulled quite tightly enough, so I'm going to go back and unwrap this and pull just a little bit more to try to get it a little bit better evened up there. It's always just a trial and error. Okay, so that is good there. Get these nice and spread out. This section, the top of the sleeve is much more gathered than the bottom of the sleeve is. But it is going to look really pretty when we're done. I love a pretty puff sleeve, and this one is going to be that. Okay, so once we have the gathering all pinned in place and everything else pinned in place all the way around, I'm going to put a couple pins in that I lost along the way. We are going to go to the machine and stitch your sleeve into place. Once you've stitched it, check it and make sure you're happy with how your gathers look. Check and make sure you don't have any puckers on the straight side, on the bodice side. And once you're happy with how that looks, you can go ahead and finish your edge and you will be finished with the sleeve. Once you've done that, I'm going to show you what it looks like just because it's so pretty. But this is what the finished girl sleeve, maybe you can see that. It's what the finished girl sleeve is going to look like on this little bubble. It's really nice. So we will see more of this later, but go ahead and finish up setting in both of your sleeves and finishing them, and then we'll move to the lower half of the garment. We are now completely done with the top of the garment. We're going to move down to the bottom half, so it's all going to be Charlie from here on out. And we are starting around number 36 on the instructions. Remember, we're doing the instructions for the online unlined pants, but we are not doing a placket. So there are going to be several steps in here that we're going to get to skip. But the first thing you need to do is get your front pant piece with your 2 front pants pieces, and you're going to pin and then stitch along the curved edge. You're also going to do the same thing with your back, pin and stitch along the curved edge. You can finish those seams with your zigzag inserter after that point. Once you have those stitched, you're going to open them up and you're going to do your side seams. So open both of them, right sides together. You're going to pin all the way down your side seams and you're going to stitch all of that too. So you're going to have this one stitched and finished, and then also on the other side. Okay, so we have the bottom of the bubble put together at the center, the back, and the sides. We are moving to the gripper strip now that goes between the legs. Remember, I'm doing the short pants, so I've got a short strip. But if you are doing the long pants, you're going to have a much longer strip, but you're going to just do the exact same thing. Also remember that I had you cut out interfacing for this piece. So fuse your interfacing to both of your gripper strip pieces. You need 2 because we're making the unlined version. So once you have fused your interfacing to your gripper strip, you're going to take one of them, just one of them, and fold it in half and press it this way, where you have raw edges on one side together, and then this is my folded edge. Now the front gripper strip and the back gripper strip are done differently. So you can't do them, you can't just do one and then do the other one just like it. You need to do them according to the instructions. So be sure that you pay attention and don't just rush through and try to do the second one like the first one, because it won't fit as well if you do it that way. So what we're going to do after you have it interfaced and folded is bring this one to the front of your garment. Be sure that you have figured out which one is the front and the back by marking it or measuring it, whatever you need to do. But get to this point here, which is the center of the lower part of the bubble, and then take your interfacing strip and you're going to put it right along here with the raw edges together. The 2 folded edges are going to be put here together with the right side of the bubble. And we're going to put some pins in here. Now your gripper strip is going to be a bit longer than this length of the crotch right here. It's going to extend out on both sides. We're just going to trim that off later. So once you have that all pinned together, you can go ahead and stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance right across here. So we have that little strip stitched in place across the end of the romper at the crotch. And now the next thing that you need to do is take this little seam and trim it down to 1/8 of an inch. I've already done that on this one. And you're also going to trim the sides of the gripper strips so that they line up in line with the sides of the romper. So it should look like this when you're done trimming. And then after that, you're going to take it, go to the iron and press it down. You'll have to press it very well across here, just like that. And the next step after you've pressed it is to do some stitching to stitch this strip down. You may find it easier to stitch. You can really do it from either side. It might be easier to stitch from this side than it is from the back, but you can choose what you want to do. But the first stitching is about 1/8 of an inch from this folded edge, and then the second stitching is going to be right along this other folded edge, which is about 3/4 of an inch from the top. Now, as you do this top stitching, it is fine to go to a straight stitch. That's what's probably going to look better as far as top stitching goes. And we have taken the stretch out of this piece by putting the interfacing in there. So just a regular machine stitch will be what you would probably want to do on this little section. Ready for the back gripper strip now. Get your other piece, your other gripper strip pattern piece, and go ahead and first of all press it in half lengthwise with your raw edges together, and then take one raw edge and you're going to press it 1/4 of an inch to the inside. So it should look like this as you're getting started with your stitching. And remember, this is an interfaced piece. I mentioned this before, but we have to interface any place on knits that has grippers. So otherwise the grippers will just rip that fabric when they're pulled apart. So the unfolded edge is what we're going to put with the right side up against the end of this romper up here in the place where it's supposed to be stitched at the back. And once again, this one's going to be longer than the gripper strip is going to be longer than the space we're putting it in. So once you stitch it, you can trim those raw edges off. And then so you're going to stitch this, you're going to trim both sides, and then you're going to press it towards the gripper strip. And that will be your next step. So the back gripper strip is stitched in place and everything is pressed up towards the gripper strip so that when we fold it over, everything is encased here. Something that I didn't say that I want you to do now, if you haven't, is go back to this seam right here and trim it down to 1/8 of an inch. This will keep this seam allowance hopefully a little bit more away from the actual grippers when we put them in there. So that would be a good thing. Just make that a little bit easier on us. So this inside seam allowance should be right at 1/8 of an inch in there. And so now we can fold it over. Now you have options. You can either stitch this across here by hand if you would like, or you can use your machine and stitch this gripper strip, totally enclosing it down all the way across this seam. Either way is just fine, but do that and then this will be completed. Okay, with our gripper strips completed here, we are ready for gathering stitches. So I've got it opened up here. You're going to go pretty much from one gripper strip to the other on each side with either 2 or 3 gathering stitches. With the gathering stitches in place, we're ready to start talking about the leg bands. And I had told you at the beginning to cut some interfacing for the leg bands. And I'm going to give you a couple of options as far as the interfacing goes, and you can decide what you want to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to adhere, or I have adhered the interfacing to the entire strip. If you were doing this with woven, the instructions would have you cut a strip half this wide and just interface half of it. That doesn't work so well with us when it comes to one of the steps that's coming here in a few minutes if just half of it is interfaced. So we need to either do all of the strip interfaced, or another option would be that you would just interface about 1 inch long strip along each end. The reason for this is that there are going to be grippers at the end of your leg bands right in here. And if we don't have some interfacing in this space, those grippers are not going to hold. They're going to be really bad for our fabric there. So interfacing at the ends is essential, but it's not really essential for the middle unless you just want to do that. It is going to take a little bit of the stretch out of it, not all of it, but a little bit if you interface it. And I'm talking, when I say interfacing, I'm talking about baby interfacing, which is extremely lightweight. I wouldn't go with anything besides that really on this step. So once you have decided what you're going to do about your interfacing, either way is fine. You are going to interface it and then fold your fabric in half and press it in half lengthwise. And then you're going to take one raw edge and you're going to press it again to the inside 1/4 of an inch. So your band is going to look like this once it's pressed. After you've pressed it, open it up, and you need to mark the center of the band with your marking pen on each side. So once you've done all that, come back and we're going to gather it to the bubble. Our next step is to gather the bubble to the leg band. You're going to need to pin it in place, starting at the end and leaving 1/4 of an inch extending of the leg band extending past this finished edge of the gripper strip. Pin that in place. Pin the mark that you did on your leg band in place to the center, your side seam here of the bubble. And then on the other end, you're going to have your 1/4 of an inch extending over here too. And you're going to gather all of that up to fit. Once you've done that, it's going to look like this. Everything is going to be the same, and you can stitch all the way across. Once you've stitched it, take a good look at everything. Make sure you're happy with how it looks. Make sure that your stitching on this opposite side looks nice and that you don't have any little puckers or tucks that you've created inadvertently. But if everything looks good to you, you can remove your gathering stitches and then iron your seam allowance towards the band. You need to do that on both legs. Okay, we have the strip stitched onto the bubble. I did go ahead and finish and trim this inside seam here. Something I realized after I made the pink one last week was that I really liked for this not to be a big bulky seam through here because it tended to show through, maybe just because that was a solid pink fabric. So I went ahead and made this seam pretty small and finished it just to kind of take care of that problem. So it's a totally optional thing if you want to try to do that. I'm going to show you two different ways to do the leg band. The first way is going to be the way it's done in the pattern. And what that will be, you have your 1/4 inch extension here past your gripper strip. And what you would do, and I also have, I should say, this top edge has already been pressed down. So you would press the 1/4 inch in, and I'm going to stick a pin in it here so I can demonstrate. And then you're going to fold this corner down with your pressed edge, and you are going to line it up where this folded edge is just a little bit past, covers up your previous stitching. So a little bit past the stitching. And you can pin that here just to show you. Okay, and so once you have done that, you're probably going to need to be pinning from this side because you're going to stitch it from this side. And you would start here, and actually you're going to start here at the far edge, and there's my awl. And you're going to start here, and you're going to top stitch here, pivot, and then go all the way down. Of course, you're going to have it pinned down all the way, and that would be how you would finish it. When you get down to the other end, you're going to have another fold just like this, where you've turned your raw edges in so that you can finish it this way. That is one way to do it. I struggled with this a little bit with the other ones that I have made. I think maybe because it's knit fabric, maybe because I'm just a little bit crazy about having the inside line of here line up, and I don't mind doing things by hand. So let me show you what I did. I ended up just folding it down and whipping it by hand all the way across this entire seam. I'm a person who doesn't mind doing the handwork on a sewing project, so that worked well for me, and I could be a little bit more precise with where my stitches were. But when you do that, you have to do a different finish on this end that extends out. So I'm going to show you how you do it here. Now we still have our folded edge, our 1/4 inch folded in, and what you do is you fold the right sides together and you line up this folded edge with this seam line here. Now this edge on the inside is also folded in and pressed in. We did that in another step. So you're going to line up these edges here, and then you can put a pin in. Maybe I can get that in there at this funny angle. Maybe not. Okay, so that's just going to hold it in place. But what I'm going to do now is take it to the sewing machine, and I'm going to stitch from here all the way over to here, encasing this, closing off this area here with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And when you do that, once you get finished, I have one that I've done. See, I've got it stitched across here. Then you can turn it with the right side out, and you have a nice finished edge there. And now I can go ahead and do my whipping by hand of this entire edge. Like I said, just choose which way you want to do it. Either way is just fine. Either way is going to finish the bubble nicely. It's just kind of your preference on which technique you want to do. But go ahead and finish these up for both legs, and we are on the home stretch here. We're not quite done, but we are getting pretty close to being finished with this bubble. Bottom half of the romper is complete. We are ready to put the two pieces together. Be sure that you have marked the center points on your bodice pieces, the center points along the bottom there. Be sure that you've done either your stay stitching along this bottom edge at a 1/4 inch, or if you want to use the seam tape, you can do that. I placed it, remember this is going to be a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so I placed it where it's a little bit up from the edge here so that I will catch a little bit of this seam tape in my seam that I sew, but it's not going to be extending real high up here because I don't want it to show through the front, but I do want a little bit of it right there on the seam line. So if you have that, you can do that. Next thing we're going to need is the gathering stitches along here. So remember, this is a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so your gathering stitches need to be the first one 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, and then 5/8 of an inch for your outside one. And then if you want to do one in the middle, you can do that for sure also. But gathering stitches are next, and do that and we will move on. Okay, now's the time where you need to pull up your gathering threads to match your bottom to the top. Line up your side seams with each other. Line up the front seams of the romper with the center front and the center back on the bodice. Pull everything up to where it matches. Stitch all of this with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. After you've stitched it, check and make sure everything looks okay, and then you can finish the inside seam and press everything up towards the bodice. Okay, we're at the very last step. We are going to do some grippers. One of the very most important things about the grippers is that you have to use long prong snaps. Now, there may be some others that you may have in your stash or you may have purchased that don't have long prongs, and I'm afraid that those are not going to hold your fabric like they would. I have not tried cam snaps with this, but I'm hesitant to say that they would work. I don't think that they are going to be quite strong enough or grip the fabric enough. You really need to get some long prong snaps like this. These are some from Snap Source. They come in lots of different colors. There's also a snap setter tool that you can purchase to go along with them. I happen to have an older tool that I've had for a long time that is the same type thing as the Snap Source. That one is purple. Mine is blue. It's a little bit different, but it's the same thing. So I'm going to use mine. And what we're going to do to start with, you need to mark where you want your grippers to go. Now, a lot of times with little outfits, you might have a gripper right here in the very middle, but since this is a seam right here and there's going to be more bulk, we're not going to put one in the middle. There's going to be one on either side of the middle and then one on each end of the leg bands. So we're going to start with what's going to be the front. So this is the front of the garment. So your prettiest snap is going to go there because the front is going to lap over the back. So all you do is, now see I have a circle marked. These that are the open rings that are circles, they are going to be a little bit easier to line up because you can see right in the middle to place that circle right over your mark. And once you've got it in the right spot, just do a lot of pushing to try to get those little spikes on the back through to the back of your fabric. Once you have them through a little bit, you can put it in your little contraption, whichever one it might be. But what it does is I've got it down on the base, and then this first level here is going to hold that snap. Now, once you've got this in place, the best thing that you can do is use some sort of a tool to push it down. I like to use this little stuff it tool right here. It's my favorite thing to use. The end of this tool fits exactly down in between the prongs of the, you can see I've got one stuck on there, in between the prongs of the snap. So what this is going to do is it's going to push that fabric down onto those prongs to really get it good and engaged in the snap. So I put that down in there, push it down pretty hard where you can see very well the ends of those prongs inside the snap setter here. If you don't have one of these, that's fine. You can probably use a pencil eraser that hasn't been used, you know, something clean, just some sort of tool that you might have to push things down. You could also just use the tip of something, but the main thing is that you have to see those 5 metal prongs sticking up through there because those are what are going to curl around the top to get it to stay on. Now, if you look at the back of your package, it's a pretty good explanation of what you need to do. But I've got my first one on, and then I'm going to take the next corresponding ring, which is going to go in the net, go right on top of this. I'm going to make sure that I'm getting it put on there exactly the right way and not upside down. So you put that one in, just lay it in there, and then put your next layer down. and take a hammer, and you're just going to hit as hard as you can with the hammer. And so we have a snap. You can see it's right on there. There's my front and there's my back. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do all of the snaps. When you get to, so your front snaps, of course, are all going to be, I'm going to have the white ones on the front. They're going to be facing this way, centered over my spots. And I have some corresponding dots on my back that I'm going to use. Now realize that, you know, the front's going to go over the back. So this round side, which looks a lot like the white one that we did, but it's silver, but it's the back of the snap, it is going to go on the back of the fabric, back through here, coming up. Be sure that you don't put it the opposite way and it will snap the wrong way. These are possible to pull off, like if you put one in the wrong way, you can do it with a little screwdriver and maybe some pliers and some elbow grease, but it's not ideal to have to take them off. So I'm going to do my my back snap right here, just that corresponds with this, and then we will be done with this part of it. So make sure I get the right one here. So I am going to put it where those little spikes are coming up right in the middle of my dot that I have on there. Put it in the little contraption and press down with my Stuff It tool here to get that fabric way down engaged into those brackets. And now we have our corresponding little piece of the snap. Put it in there, lay that down, and bang it with a hammer. Is. Now that one's on there, and it is going to correspond with this one. We will snap them together. It's a real good, nice, sturdy snap, and looks good. So go ahead, work on your snaps, finish them up. Don't be scared of these. They are really not that hard to do. Yes, it does require a hammer, but it's not hard to do at all, and you are almost finished. So here we are, all finished at the end. Got a couple of sweet rompers here. Here's the one for the boy, and I've got the one that we made for the girl with a sleeve. So sweet. We are all so excited about this pattern. I hope that you will share your creations, whether they're knit or woven or anything about Charlie. We want to hear it and see it. If you have any questions or any problems, be sure to comment on the Facebook post or on the blog post. You can always call the shop too. We're always happy to help if you have any input or questions or something I didn't quite cover well enough. Anyway, until then, happy sewing.